Hello and welcome to episode 380 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm great as ever, Andy. In fact, I'm quite excited this week because we're going to be doing something slightly different on the podcast this week.
Yeah, it was my idea really to come up with and do something a little bit different because I'm a podcast addict, as you know, Damien, and I listen to lots of other podcasts. And I realise we're missing a trick. Something that a lot of other podcasts do and do very well is they actually cover old topics, but they don't just produce the same episode again. They actually throw back to a previous episode and then maybe give a little bit of insight and maybe an update as to what's gone on. And I thought that would be really good, especially with the news that came this week. So you explain what we're doing.
So there was a piece of research that came out in the news this week by AJ Bell, and it led with a headline that retirees are in line for a £2,000 state pension windfall. So obviously that grabbed a fair bit of attention, and what it relates to is the triple lock on the state pension. So the state pension triple lock ensures that the state pension is meant to rise by inflation, wage growth, or 2.5%, whichever is greater. And now, with inflation rising so high, and we've heard that the Bank of England recently predicted that inflation could get above 13% by the end of 2022 and remain elevated, that potentially is good news for people receiving their state pension. And that's because when they increase the state pension every April, they actually do it with reference to the inflation rate in the previous September. So if you're listening to this show now, just after it's been published, then the inflation rate in September 2022 will be relevant for the increases that you'll see in the state pension in 2023. Now, AJ Bell, looking at different projections, said there's obviously a very good chance that we're going to have above 10% inflation this year, but we could also have above 10% inflation next year. So when we get to next September in 2023, if that's the case, then we could see double-digit increases on the state pension, not only in 2023, but 2024. And they ran a few numbers and suggested that we could see the state pension rise from a weekly amount of £185.15, assuming you get the full state pension, to £203.79 in April 2023, and then to £224.10 in April 2024. Now, there are a lot of assumptions being made in this piece of research. And the reason why I thought it was interesting, because you can't rely on the triple lock being honoured, because obviously, as we know, it wasn't last year. And I know it will be political suicide for the new Conservative leader not to adhere to the triple lock, but it's still a possibility. So that got me thinking about ways to increase your state pension or your pension more widely. So it's not just for people who are in retirement now, but tips for people who are trying to save for retirement, because the message is you can't rely on the state to keep increasing your pension, as has been proven in recent history, especially in the face of the cost of living crisis that we have. So what we did is we realised that we talked about some of this previously on the podcast. And now our podcast has been going for 7 or 8 years now, I think, Andy. I lose track. And we trawled through the archives and came up with some content that we'd done 3 or 4 years ago in different episodes. And so Andy, through the wonders of his editing skills, has re-edited that content and pulled it all together into a succinct episode that is going to be our first ever throwback episode about topics. So periodically we might do this from time to time, but it is a good point of time to do it. But we felt it was a good time to try our first ever throwback episode.
Yeah, so the next couple of pieces that you'll hear that have been edited down are tips to boost your pension, but also there's some insight and research that's aimed at everyone, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, on how you can achieve your retirement objectives. So as Damien said, this piece of news and research is potentially great news for people just about to retire, but actually it can't be relied on. So there's other things that you can do to ensure you get the pension that you want and deserve when you retire.
Yeah, and let's be quite frank, Andy, the chances of some people having a state pension in the future are reducing all the time, because obviously the UK population is becoming more elderly, and so we can't overly rely that we are all going to be getting an equivalent level of state pension that people get today in the future. So we looked at 7 quick ways to boost your pension, and there's an article that goes into much greater depth on the website if you want to refer to it after listening to this piece for a bit more information. But there are ways you can boost your pension, and one of them, the very first one, is pension credit. It's something that's overlooked. Now, pension credit is essentially a benefit that you can apply for. It is means tested, and you can only get it if you're over the state pension age. And there are 2 parts to pension credit. There's a guaranteed credit part, which basically tops up your income, and there's a savings credit, which is aimed at people who've saved up a bit. It's a bit of extra for them. But of course, if you are eligible for pension credit, then you will also likely qualify for other benefits such as lower council tax, cold weather payments, free dental care. So you need to make sure you look at those. If you ever want to check if you're entitled to any benefits, go to Entitled To on the .gov.uk website. It's a tool. Basically, you answer a number of questions and it will work out which benefits from a range of benefits you may be able to get. Now, as I said, there are some qualifying criteria, but the point is, go and read the article with all the criteria and explains it in more detail and more accurately than I've just explained it there. The key message as well is that you may know somebody who might be entitled to pension credits. You may have a parent or a relative who may be entitled to pension credit. And the issue is, a lot of people don't realise it's something that exists that they could claim. So make sure you check if you are eligible or somebody else is eligible for pension credit.
Yeah, no one's going to be knocking on your door checking that you're claiming these things. You have to actively go out and seek the advice.
Yeah,
which is such a shame because there's people going through hardship and don't even know these kind of things.
And the second one is delaying your state pension. Now, lots of people don't realise you can delay your state pension. So if you get to state pension age, now as it stands, you don't automatically get your state pension. You have to ask for it. And if you don't, then you technically start to defer your state pension. And you can do that. And the reason you might want to do that is because if you defer your state pension, you effectively get your ultimate state pension when you get to claim it boosted slightly. And now there are different rules depending on when you retired. So there was the old basic state pension. There's slightly different rules for those people who have deferred compared to the rules for people who are now on the new state pension system that we've got. Their state pension. They decide not to take it and they say, do you know what? I'm going to take it at some point in the future. They get a 1% boost for every 9 weeks they delay. So what that works out to be, if you delay taking your state pension by a year, you get an extra 5.8% boost to your state pension each year as a result. Now, there are pros and cons, of course, from deferring your state pension. I'll rattle through a couple of them. The pros, of course, is it boosts your ultimate payment, and you can manage your tax bill in a way because state pension is taxable. You may be working, you may decide you don't want to take your income, your state pension in that particular year because it will increase your tax. You may decide to defer it a year and it will reduce your ultimate tax bill. Now the cons, of course, if you are in poor health, there is obviously a trade-off here because in order to make it worthwhile, because if you give up a year's state pension, then you only get a small increase each year from then on. And so there's a balancing act by which point the extra amount you get a year equates to the annual amount you gave up in the first place. And if you do the maths, you need to live for about 18 years from the point at which you start claiming in order to win, basically, which is why a lot of people won't do it. And of course, the other thing to bear in mind, if you do any of this, then it may impact other benefits as well because you're starting to change your income. So something to bear in mind. Next up, paying missing national insurance contributions. If you're nearing retirement, then you should go to the .gov.uk website and get a state pension forecast. That will tell you what pension you are likely to get from the state. And of course, don't forget that it's based upon qualifying years of paying national insurance contributions, and currently it's 35 years to get the full state pension. And you need 10 years, remember, to get anything at all. Now, of course, there could be reasons why you've got a bit of a gap in your record. So you are able to pay some of that gap if it's been within the last 6 years usually. So you can pay voluntary national insurance contributions to fill any gap to make sure you get a full state pension. Now, usually it is worth paying those contributions because if you do the maths, then the amount that you pay to get your full state pension going forward, it will only take you normally about 4 years to be quids in again, because the amount you've outlaid national insurance contributions is relatively low, but you would get that back after 4 years effectively by having a higher state pension year on year. So it usually is worth it. So it's something to bear in mind. So another way to boost your pension income is if you are thinking about getting an annuity, I always struggle to say that, then think about an impaired or enhanced life annuity if you have an illness or you smoke. Now, people often think and realise that when it comes to life insurance, the healthier you are, the better, because you pay less premiums on life insurance because the insurer thinks you're less likely to die. Conversely, in the annuity world, the more likely they think you are to die, the more money you get from your pension pot. So if you had $100,000 pension pot and you went and bought an annuity, if you buy an enhanced or impaired life annuity because you're a smoker or you are unwell, you have some medical condition, you will get more a year income than somebody who is fit as a fiddle. So it's the one time in life that you win by being unwell, and it can mean you get 20% to 50% higher income. Don't just dismiss annuities out of hand is the message. Now, number 5, pension drawdown. There's more information, as I say, on the website, but pension drawdown is whereby you can decide to take some tax-free cash from your pension and you put the rest of it in and invest it, and you can then start to draw from that and produce an income stream. By investing the money, it can grow. And of course, there is the flip side. It could, if markets crash, it could fall, but you can use pension drawdown if you're shrewd enough to try and grow the income and make it more sustainable over a longer term. It's something to look at, and if you're unsure, then always seek advice. Number 6, look for lost pensions. Now, most of us have moved around jobs. We have pension pots all over the place. We may have forgotten. Now, if you find those pensions, you could consolidate those and you could end up having a bit of an income you didn't realise that you were entitled to. So to find them, use the pension tracing service. Again, go to the .gov.uk website, and it's free to use. You can find your old pensions and then you can choose to try and consolidate them. There are companies like Pension Bee who we've done a review of. Go and look at the review on the website, which is a company that specialises in finding and consolidating your pensions, in fact, into one sort of cheap pension product, which you can then use to draw an income from or grow if you want. So go and have a look at that. It's one of the tech startups and is doing very well. And finally, claim tax relief. So there are people, particularly high rate taxpayers, who may pay into a pension and not claim the full amount of tax relief they're entitled to. And they have to do that via their tax return. You'll always get the basic rate amount, the 20% kicker. It will be claimed by your pension provider automatically. That should be the norm. But if you are a 40% taxpayer or more, you need to claim the rest via your tax return. Ultimately, that will mean that you've got some money that you are entitled to that you can claim, which you can then do as you will with that and invest that for your future if you want. You've got 4 years in which to make a claim for tax relief on previous pension contributions. So there we go. For more information, do go to the website. But what was quite interesting about a bit of research by 7IM, they're an investment company, and I mentioned them and credited them with it because it's actually a very good piece of work. And what they did was look at the small tweaks you could make to your pension or the way you save throughout your life. So don't switch off if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, nearing retirement. This is all relevant. What are the small tweaks you can make that could have the biggest impact on your retirement income and how much pension you have? Because I like the idea of small tweaks. No one wants to be drastic. We don't want to do anything too crazy. It's small and often. And what they did is they ran through a whole load of scenarios, and they looked at people who saving amount of 2% of their income a year into a pension, so monthly, up to 20% a year into their pension. They looked at the withdrawal rates at retirement, so how much you were going to take a year. It's 5% a year up to 100%. They looked at different retirement ages, 55 to 75, and they looked at different risk profiles that people took when they were investing, and they chucked it all together. It was 10,000 scenarios. That's a lot of potential scenarios to see what had the biggest impact, what minor changes actually had an outsized impact on your retirement. And it was really looking at how you could avoid running out of money. Now, of course, the earlier you start saving into a pension, the better you'll be, and when it comes to retirement, because of that wonderful thing of compounding. And that's kind of a given. We've all worked that out. But what is interesting is when you're young, so let's say you had £20,000 a year salary and you saved 5% of that money into your pension a year, and you had a growth rate of 5%. This is one of the scenarios they used. Now, at the end of year one, 5% you would have put in, that means £1,000. At the end of year one, add 5% growth, you'd have £1,050. But if you'd instead, rather than saved 5%, if you'd saved in 6%, then that end of year one figure would have been 1,250 because of the extra amount you obviously putting in and the extra growth you get because they assume the same growth rate. The point is, when you think about your pension pot, when it's small and when it's less than the size of your salary, so in this case 20,000, the bigger impact in making it grow is not by increasing your investment, the level of risk you're taking, but the amount you put in it. Does that make sense? So again, think of extremes. If you only have £1 in your pension pot and you put £1 in, you've doubled it. Whereas if you've got £1 in your pension pot and you get a 5% return, you've got £1 and 5p. So what it means is if you're listening to this podcast, the takeaway, if you're young, one of the biggest impacts you're going to have on the size of your pension pot for quite some time, and if you eventually get to retirement at this point, is to pay in more. Taking more risk won't really do anything at this stage. When you take more risk and you maybe get more return, you need a bigger pot. Because then that 5%, 6%, 7% of a larger number is a large number. As opposed to sort of use the phrase I often used to hear, I think my dad used to say it to me, 2/5 of F all is still F all. So when you get to your 30s, this is where it gets interesting. Because if you've been paying a certain amount in a month, let's say that 5% being steady, and you've got that £25,000 a year salary, you will get to a point where your pension pot will be £20,000. So your pension pot will match your annual salary. So if you think about it, now you manage to dial up your investment risk slightly and you've got a better return every year, so you've got 6% rather than 5%, then suddenly that is a bigger amount than the 5% contribution you're putting in. And am I making sense?
You are indeed, yeah.
So as you go through life, now hang on to this because this is starting to make some people feel a bit uncomfortable. Because as you get towards your 50s, your 40s and your 50s, your pension pot could be 2-3 times your salary if you've been saving in regularly. So let's just use a round number to make it easy for everyone. £100,000 is now in your pension pot. The one flaw of the research is it assumes your salary isn't growing at that greater rate because people's salary can jump. But let's say you're just steadily paying in at that rate you were before. Actually, by getting a higher return on your money, let's say you got to 7%, you'd get £7,000 added to your pension pot that year from just taking more risk. That's way more than you putting in, say, the £5,000 or whatever you were putting in, or the £1,000 you were putting in a month. It would make a much bigger impact. So there is this bizarre trade-off that the bigger your pension pot is, the more it will grow because of the more risk you take because of the compounding effect. The smaller your pension pot, the more it will grow by the amount of money you put in it. So the smaller amounts you put in it. Because if you think in time, no one can match the size of their pension pot with contributions, can they? If you've got £100,000 pension pot, most people, you can't even put in £100,000 a year because of the tax limits. So what it really does, it starts to throw into question the merits of lifestyling. So when you buy these investment products, they're automatically, as you get older, they start to take you out of risky investments like equities and put you into lower risk ones like bonds. Because actually taking more investment risk and getting a greater return will increase your pension pot much more quickly by the wonders of compounding because your pot is so much bigger. So dialing it down is probably counterintuitive. Obviously that comes with a caveat because you sit there and think, well, this is great. I take more risk now, don't I, when I get older? Of course, when you take more risk, you've got more chance of your pot falling 10% as well. So it's not a guarantee. But it does also call into question that most conventional ideas of lifestyling and about the way you manage risk are based upon things that happened before pension freedoms existed. So pension freedoms, in simple terms, allow you to raise your pension, take as much as you want out of it. And actually, more importantly, you don't have to buy an annuity anymore. Some people who listen to the podcast might realise or remember the days where you had to buy an annuity once you hit retirement. So it could be 60, 65, you were buying an annuity. So you took your money out of your pension pot, gave it to an insurance company, and they gave you 2/5 of F all, to quote my dad. And that was your income forever. You don't have to do that anymore. But what it means is, therefore, the end date, the conclusion of your growing of your pension pot can actually be later. It can be 75. And it means that, yes, you're going to be wanting to draw an income, but it does extend that ability to take risk, in theory, if you're comfortable with it, if you're not having to draw on it or rely on that pension pot. So the point of this section of the podcast was just to really get people to think that, yeah, when you're young, they say put in anything you can. The bigger impact on seeing your statements grow bigger is going to be about the amount you put in, because it's disheartening. You see the market go up 10% in a year and your little pot seems like it's done nothing, because the amount you're saving in is much bigger than the amount that's in the pot. As that dynamic changes, it starts to get exciting the more investment risk you take. But of course, as you get older, you may not want to. But it just means that you could question and think about when an advisor tells you taking more risk is a bad thing or less risk. Get them to plan it, cash flow planning. Get them to look at it in the round of how sustainable your income is or will be, because that's what it's all about. A lot of this stuff is about whether you can survive without running out of money. And don't just allow somebody just to use the old conventional wisdoms, although they are very valid and they're very safe, but your scenario may be different. So it doesn't hurt to think differently. So let's try and be a little bit more creative and change the conversation on pensions.
So there we have it. I hope you found that interesting. That's our first throwback episode. Do get in touch to let us know what you thought about that and if it's something you'd like us to do again in the future.
Yeah, and if you've listened to lots of the past episodes, which I know there are people who've gone through our back catalogue, I always try and create evergreen content. So we don't do these throwback episodes and we don't tend to cover over old topics at all. So if there is a topic that we've covered in the last 7-8 years that you would like us to revisit, because things do change, insights do change, and it may be that if we recover that topic, it might be quite different to when we did it the first time around, then please do email me, Damien@moneytothemasses.com or Andy@moneytothemasses.com, and let us know of any particular episodes you'd like us to go back and revisit and bring up to date.
And so that's it. We're done for this week, Damien. Until next time.
So until next time.